AI is having a strong impact on the world around us, from finance to manufacturing and grocery, which is where we find ourselves today as Walmart introduces digital shelf labels that utilize AI and digital technology to automatically change pricing for items in store. And the Federal Reserve is now considering making it easier for commercial banks to lend to private banks. We will delve into why both of these articles are important for our ever changing landscape and what important economic and financial discussions are behind the headlines. I am Matthew White with my co-host Nyamki Buchanan, and this is Road to Riches. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Road to Riches. Uh, and we're just going to get right into it with the first article. This one, again, from the Wall Street Journal. It's talking about, oh, shoot, yeah, you'll cut that out. This one from Retail Brew, talking about Walmart's introduction to DSLs or digital shelf labels. And essentially, Walmart is rolling out electronic price tags across all of its US stores. And so this will allow the company to change pricing for different items around the store automatically. And it will, according to Walmart, increase their efficiency substantially because now instead of days or even weeks, sometimes months, now it takes moments to change the price of an item in store. And this has caused a lot of debate, and we'll get into why it has caused a lot of debate. But again, just going through the article, we're reading that these DSLs are being rolled out to its entire storefront, and that Walmart plans to be done with this by fiscal year end. And we're again introducing it to all 2,300 plus locations in the United States. So these DSLs would replace paper price tags, and again, used to they would take days, months. Now they take a mere hours, if that, sometimes minutes, according to Walmart. And this will free up associates to work on customer service a lot more instead of being bogged down by changing pricing labels and doing dubious back office work. So now getting into the debate and why people are worried about this. So critics have talked about how these DSLs, Walmart could use this for bad. And of course, this is what critics of new ideas always do, right? They come in here and they say, well, we're assuming that you're going to do the absolute worst with this technology. You're going to be extremely unethical. And so in this case, what can Walmart do with this? Well, they can do something called dynamic pricing, where Walmart can come in and, for example, change the price of, chocolate milk change the price of chocolate milk to be higher in the morning and less in the evening, or change the price of orange juice to be more expensive in the summer. And things like that, or more expensive during the afternoon in the summer rather than the evening because it's hotter in the summer. Same thing with ice cream, things like that. That's an example of dynamic pricing, and that's what critics are talking about. And so, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, the UFCW, actually came out and ran a national campaign saying that, we can't have this technology. This technology is dangerous. It poses a threat to our workers. And they've actually run campaigns and, proposed legislation in certain states and requiring legislation against this technology and banning, sometimes even outright banning this technology. And, they for now they're saying that it's limited to stores larger than 10,000 feet or exactly at 10,000 feet. So, greater than or equal to 10,000 feet. But, we're going to get into why, there's an argument for and against this stuff. Obviously, going forward, the UFCW is also calling this a type of surveillance pricing, and furthermore surveillance marketing, where with this new technology, stores can now more accurately survey and track and almost spy on their customers more than they already do, to try and figure out, again, these patterns of when customers buy things, why customers buy things, and that's the union's reasoning for coming out against this technology so much. And so, and again, they cloak all of that reasoning with their good-heartedness, as people always do, and say, well, customers are going to lose the ability to comparison shop, so they won't be able to, for example, compare the price of chocolate milk at Walmart with the price of chocolate milk at Target, or Crest here in Oklahoma, or as you have there in Texas, Gnocchi, HEB, or anything like that. Customers will lose that ability, which is an interesting talking point. And again, we'll touch up on that here in a second. But so some lawmakers have actually, bought what the UFCW is selling, and have come out in favor of banning this technology. And so what is the other side of the argument? So that is one side of the argument. What's the other side of the argument? Well, the other side is that Walmart has actually come out and said explicitly, we're not going to use these DSLs, again, digital shelf labels. We're not going to use these DSLs for dynamic pricing. That's not at all why we're coming out with this technology. We're coming out with this technology because we want to free up our associates to go do more important things, as is normal for a business to want to do. We don't want our employees to have to waste their time doing these things that don't provide any direct value to the customer right away. And so that's what Walmart is saying. On top of that, the National Retail Federation came out and said these DSLs, they actually are more of a communication tool and not so much a decision-making system. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they don't exactly enable surge pricing. They don't really track customers, and they don't really collect personal data. And why they don't? Well, a lot of grocery stores, because the market is so saturated, meaning there's a lot of competition, because it's so saturated, because there's a grocery store pretty much on every street corner. Grocery stores depend on loyalty, especially somebody like Walmart, who has so much competition to deal with. They depend on loyalty. They depend on their customers trusting them to not only have the lowest price on something, or close to the lowest price, but also not to, for lack of a better phrase, screw them over. They want their producers to be loyal to them, just as the customer is loyal to the producer. And then moving on, a UC San Diego paper actually found no evidence of this type of technology that Walmart plans to roll out, causing price spikes in products, even during periods of elevated inflation, again, such as ice cream in the summer. And so we get to this idea that grocery stores don't exactly profit from one item. They don't even really profit from a basket of items. What they profit from really is their customers choosing to buy those items from them. Yes, they want you to buy their stuff, but if you're just going to buy their stuff once and then leave, that's not really good for them in the long run. They want your loyalty. if you're not loyal to them, again, in a market like the grocery market with such a low margin market, a low margin industry, they need your loyalty to continue to be profitable. And that's kind of the idea when we're talking about mass retail, like the grocery business. And then adding our own kind of analysis here. Uh, you know, that's the name of the game is in the grocery market, is this idea of loyalty, and how if Walmart did use their digital labels to price spike during inflated hours, well, there's just going to be somebody else who doesn't do that. Maybe their item is a little bit more expensive, but it doesn't change. Whereas Walmart's item does change, and people start noticing that Walmart does these things in their mind, in the customer's mind at least, which is all that matters, to make more money off of hot days or cold days or what have you. And people react to that stuff. I mean, just ask Target during the LGBTQ stuff that they went through in 2023 and 2024, and people still see that they're still struggling with it, even though they're trying to save their image. And so, uh, companies are going to be tempted to use this technology for that reason, but uh, the market will come in, especially in a saturated environment like grocery, and say, no, 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 that's not going to work. You're going to lose customers, and they will. And that's kind of the underlying economic principle behind this story. And so hopefully it works out for Walmart. I think it will, and we'll see what happens going into the rest of 2026, and what this idea does for the company.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of things that I think are really important. The most important, I think that you touched on is the idea of competition essentially preventing Walmart and any other company from being able to do something like this. With the idea of brand loyalty, there that means that there is a certain amount of wiggle room that we as customers give these companies on their prices, right? If I'm loyal to Walmart, for example, then uh if Walmart is selling chocolate milk for $2 a gallon, whereas Kroger is selling chocolate milk for $1.80 a gallon, well, I'm probably still going to go to Walmart and just pay that 20-cent premium. But if Kroger is selling chocolate milk for $1.80 and Walmart is selling chocolate milk for $5 a gallon, well, at that point, I don't care who I'm loyal to. Walmart is no longer economically viable for me to buy that chocolate milk from. So that's one thing that is
Right.
definitely keeping the possibility of true price discrimination or dynamic or surge pricing, whatever you want to call it, from happening. But at the same time, there that on while on that idea of competition, not everyone is in that position. It for me in a 5 to 10 minute drive, I can be at a Walmart, a Sprouts, an HEB, or a Kroger. I have four different grocery store options that I can go to within 10 minutes. And not everyone has that option. There are plenty of people that live outside city limits or out in the country or even in, what some people refer to as a food desert, even if you are in the city for various reasons, mostly theft, but that's not for this discussion, where you don't have two grocery stores in a 10-minute drive. Even if you say take 30 minutes or so to get to work, you know, on that way there, you may only pass two Walmarts. You may only pass two Krogers. You may only pass, one Whole Foods in that 30-minute radius, for example. You may not have the choice of both a Walmart and a Kroger and a Tom Thumb and an HEB, for example. So when you are in these situations where you don't have the freedom of choice, not only between individual stores but amongst brands, well, then those areas are definitely more susceptible to Walmart being able to, or any other company for that matter, being able to use these digital labels in a nefarious way. I mean, let's take a look at things from a slightly different perspective, right? What if you are in that situation where you do have choice, but now instead of just Walmart having these digital labels, Walmart and Target get these labels. Walmart and Target and Kroger get these labels. Walmart and Target and Kroger and HEB get these labels. Well, at that point, you what option do you have? You brought up the idea of comparison shopping. Most people do their comparison shopping either through an app or the online portal, right? Because at this point, although some stores still do send circulars in the mail, most people, even if you do get them, you just toss them, right? So if you go online, you still may to some degree be able to see the surge pricing if you are quick enough to put in the specific store and the chain is uh, uh, ethical enough, I should say, to match the stores, sync up the prices that they display in store with what they display online, which is not always the case. So in that situation, if they don't properly sync, then let's say you go to Walmart, you think that chocolate milk is $2 a gallon at Walmart. You think it's $1.80 at Kroger. You pull up the Kroger app to check if it's still $1.80, and it says it is. So you say, okay, well, let me go over to Kroger instead. It's right across the street. I'll just go buy from there. But then when you get to that Kroger, because of these digital labels, they're selling it for 220 instead of 180. Well, that's a threat that we have when this type of technology starts to get more widespread. And at that point, it simply becomes an ethical question, a question of business ethics. At what point do we say that being able to quickly change or update a price is not the right thing that stores should be doing, that chains should be doing? And as customers, we're not going to patronize the companies that do this. Something else that was discussed a little bit, and as you said, Walmart even outright said, "Hey, we're not going to try and engage in any type of price discrimination." But the truth is, although these labels themselves don't necessarily have the ability to track or determine or change or update based on specific individuals, the technology is already out there.
Right.
Walmart and all these other grocery stores, they have cameras everywhere in the stores. They can easily use your cell phone to geofence, right? And say, I know that this person is in this store. And then they go to the cameras and say, I know that this person is in this aisle or is in this area, right? And based on their previous shopping habits and the other information that we've gathered, because let's be honest, these companies that are at least somewhat in the data broker market generally know a lot more about you than you do. I mean, I don't know if our viewers are still familiar with it, but at one point there was this major issue about this store. I can't remember what store it was, but based on changes in a woman's shopping habits, they determined that she was pregnant, even though she hadn't taken a pregnancy test and known for herself. So
Right.
then they started sending advertisements or started advertising to her baby related products, formula, baby food, uh, strollers, things like that. And she was so confused. And then the next week, that's when she found out that she was pregnant. So if if these companies can, they already know approximately how much you're willing to pay for a specific good. But if they know that and they have the technology to figure out where you are in the store and they have the technology to update these prices essentially at the drop of a hat. Because I mean, it's how difficult can it really be to connect these DSLs, these digital shelf labels, to some algorithm or AI program that takes the knowledge of you being there, how much you're able to pay, your shopping habits, your desires, etc., and just updates the price in real time. And then when the next person walks by, they do the same thing and update the price for him. To be honest, it's at some point it may get, if we don't stand up against these types of practices now, we very well may get to a point where these shopping labels don't even display prices at all. And you're not going to know how much you pay until you get to the register and start scanning.
Right.
And
Right.
and that's something that is, it seems very dystopian, but it's a very real possibility. So I don't really care if Walmart says we're not doing these things, because even if Walmart doesn't do them, or doesn't do them now, doesn't do them for the next 5 years, doesn't do them for the next 10 years, well, then at some point, Kroger is going to get this technology and they may start doing it. Tom Thumb is going to get this technology and they may start doing it. Crest is going to get this technology and they may start doing it. Target's going to start doing it. Sam's is going to do it. Costco is going to do it. Right? Someone is going to start doing this first, and other companies are at that point going to say, this is okay. And it
Right.
just makes it easy for collusion between companies to some degree. But more importantly, it sets a precedent that not only can we institute price discrimination based on class or location or or anything like that. We can institute price discrimination on an individual level based on what we think you're like.
Right.
And all of that is possible purely because we have given up a level of privacy that I don't think anyone ever wanted to give up per se, but through so many little pieces chipping away, right? You want to be on Twitter, you want to be on Instagram, you want to be on Facebook Messenger or on WhatsApp. You have an email. For students, you have an account with McGraw Hill, for example, right? All these things, you put your information in all these little things, either because you want to, so you're not left out, or you have to for a job or for school or whatever the case may be. And little by little, these individual companies get a little bit more information about you. Especially when it comes to like digital assistants and things like that, right? Alexa is always listening to you. How do you think it knows when you say the wake word? Right? Even your phones, right? You have Siri on your phone. You have Google Assistant on your phone. They're always listening. Even if they tell you that they're only doing local language processing, which means supposedly they're not sending this information off into the cloud for some massive data center to have access to it and store it and use it to improve their customer service experience in the future, or whatever the case may be, improve their models, their voice recognition models, or what have you. We have given, both knowingly and unknowingly, essentially unrestricted access to our lives through a combination of the technology that we use and carry around with us essentially 24/7, and the services and companies and products that we interact with. There's a reason why in privacy policies they bury deep down in the fine print that these companies are able to sell your data. I mean, even some of the most private things about you that you would hope would never get out, meaning your genetic information, right? 23andMe recently went through a lawsuit about this, where they were sending people's genetic information out to police databases and everywhere else. I mean, look, if one of these companies, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, whatever, had a data breach, and I think one of them has, but don't quote me on that. I don't remember for sure, so I'm not gonna unknowingly slander someone, right? So if one of these companies had a data breach and people's historical, genetic, personal information on that level was just out on the internet for anyone to get, imagine imagine what type of bad actors could arise from things like this, right? I mean, we can go all the way around the bush, or around the horn, saying, oh well, we need to watch out for medical companies. They're going to take your data and start formulating specific viruses to target specific people, whatever. I don't care if that's true or not, because if it is, we can't do anything about it, and if it's not, then it doesn't matter anyway, right? So getting back to the main point, it's that, at what point are we as consumers going to say that enough is enough? We're not going to just let these companies run around and do whatever they want. We're not going to let these companies use AI to sequester us into certain categories, or specific prices. We're not going to allow them to more or less lie to us in real time by updating prices throughout the day, so that if I go in at 9 a.m. trying to buy eggs, they're going to charge me more because it's breakfast time than if I go in at 3 p.m. to buy eggs. You know, I understand it that some companies do this supposedly legitimately. You know, taxi companies, for example, Uber, Lyft, etc. When demand is high, they raise prices. For airlines, right? When you get closer to the date of the flight, they're going to raise the prices, right? I understand some of these things, and we have accepted some of them. But to be perfectly honest with you, why is it that we accept that with some of these? I sure, Uber, Lyft, they only have a certain number of drivers at any given time, right? And they have to raise the prices to incentivize more drivers to get on the road. I understand that. Fine, I don't care about it. But other things, like I said the airline, right? You know in advance how many people can fit on that airplane. So why does it matter if I book my ticket 6 weeks in advance or 6 days in advance? You know how much it's going to cost to do this flight. Set a price and keep it. So my point is, again, that this comes down to a privacy and business ethics question. And as consumers, again, we have the power to draw the line and enforce it. And no matter what Walmart says, no matter what their plan is and how they think they're going to implement these things, businesses have, particularly public businesses, have a legal obligation, fiduciary obligation, to make the most money, basically, to provide the highest return to their shareholders. And these things right here are going to make it so much easier for them to do it. All they have to do is just wait a couple of years, and then when people aren't looking, reverse their policy that says that we're not going to price discriminate with these DSLs. It's that simple. And I don't think people truly understand how scary that can be.
Well, lot of points there. Yeah, I think that this technology, uh, uh, I believe that it's already been harmful. Uh, Almost, if not just straight up unethical. Um, and of course, in business, that's just going to happen. You don't fault the system of capitalism for bad actors being at play, because that's literally happened for all of history. People are bad, and but there's a lot of good people too. And I would play devil's advocate here and say, well, I don't. I would play devil's advocate and say that, well, I'm not really sure that I'm not really sure that we have just kind of stood back and let things like dynamic pricing just go. For example, Uber does do dynamic pricing, and it does have legitimate reasons for dynamic pricing, but it let's not forget it does have to compete with um, uh, an equally known company like Lyft. It does also have to compete in large metropolitan areas with taxi cabs and other, local firms. Um, and the same thing with hotels, especially with hotels. Hotels uh, do dynamic pricing as well, depending on if it's daytime or it's nighttime, and that's largely because they have to adjust those rates based on when they expect to be vacant and when they expect to be full. How hard is it to clean a room and get it ready for the next guest, um, based on employment availability? And so, there are legitimate reasons for certain industries to do price discrimination the way they do. But let's also not glaze over the fact that we haven't exactly stood the consumer still has a plenty of power. For example, what happened to Target? I mean, uh, people legitimately stopped shopping at Target so much that they fired their old CEO because the brand was dying. The grocery store it wasn't just stagnating, it was literally losing market share and losing overall revenue. Had a quarter over quarter loss in revenue that had happened for, I believe, 4 consecutive quarters of consecutive revenue loss across the entire Target brand. Uh, and they literally fired their CEO because of it. And that had to do with, again, the LGBTQ things that were going on in 2023, where they dealt with a large boycott. Same thing happened with Budweiser, where people were upset that Budweiser put um, some they were mad that they Budweiser put Dylan Mulvaney on a can, and Budweiser literally jumped through hoops to try and recover their brand. Their stock plummeted, um, and I say all of that to address several points that you made. Number one, which I thought was the most pressing, was what about food deserts? Like you said, and same thing for me. In fact, I don't have to drive as long as you because you live in a larger area than I do. Mine is a lot more close knit, and so I can actually drive 5 minutes and be around even more grocery stores than you can in 10. And so, and but in the example of food deserts where people may not really have a choice. There's for example, the old joke of, if Dollar General finding an empty area out in the middle of nowhere and saying this is a perfect place to set up shop. Well, and it's a joke because it's real. It's like they actually do that. And what about those people who only have a Dollar General to shop at, and maybe a Walmart, but that's it? What do they do? Well, I think that I would say that if we as a society were really upset with this kind of technology, or took Walmart at their word that they weren't going to do this, especially with the massive trust that we've put in Walmart's hands after giving them all of the market share that we used to give Target. If they went back on their word, even in a place as small as my example, if word got out, well, that market share would leave Walmart and go somewhere else, as we've seen historically. So and I don't believe that's just me saying it. I mean, I just laid out two real examples of very large companies doing something that society did not like, even though it was, quote unquote, socially acceptable. uh, Society at large did not like it, and they literally caused a CEO to be fired, and a brand stock to plummet, and then them completely switching up, getting rid of the controversial can with the picture on it, and and going back to the way that they were in the freaking 90s. And so and so I think it would be extremely damaging to Walmart's brand if they did go back on their word. However, all of that said, I concede your points, and I actually, agree that, this technology can be used for very, very bad things. Although I don't exactly believe that's a real point to be made. In my mind, these DSLs, these digital labels, are, at the end of the day, are tools. Just like AI is really, AI is a tool. The internet is a tool. Um, and these tools can be used for good, and they can be used for bad. And this is where ethics come in. This is where and a lot of these ethics that have been socially instilled in businesses and corporations around us. And I mean, you are right. What are we going to be willing to put up with? And but I would just come back and say, well, society has spoken in the past, in the very recent past, on what exactly it's going to put up with. And Walmart has said that they're not going to do something, and currently a lot of people have put their trust in Walmart as opposed to Target or anybody else. And so I believe it would be extremely damaging to Walmart's reputation if they went back on their word, and they did some very bad things, in some very bad ethical things, in our opinion, with this new technology. Um, so, like I said, we can wait and see what happens in the rest of 2026, and what happens with this technology. I just don't think that I don't think in my educated guess is that Walmart won't go back on their word. But you're right, there is a very real risk and very real temptation to do so. So we'll see going forward. But it's certainly a conversation about, when a company gains so much in efficiency, when does it become a consumer's disadvantage, which is another economic principle, worth considering in a situation like this, is efficiency gain versus consumer gain, and what happens when the company takes all of the efficiency, and when they have perfect information, what happens in that situation. And economically speaking, I think, in a situation of perfect information, there's this other principle, which you and I both know well, had to study a lot, of perfect competition, where, okay, well, now there's perfect information in the market, but the fact that you have it means that everybody has it, or at least has the means to get it. And so, now what? Now all of a sudden the price become now all of a sudden demand is the price, because everybody has perfect information. And now that everybody has perfect information, there's no longer preferable brands. Loyalty is no longer decided by, like you were saying, Kroger versus Walmart, or Crest versus Target. It's now just who has the lowest price. And that's the consequence of this, for the consumer. It's a it's a two-sided equation. There are two sides to this equation, of course. I just think it's important to pay attention to both sides, especially in a weighty situation like this.
Yeah, completely correct. I agree with a lot that you said there at the end. Um, we are already at about 40 minutes, so we need to be kind of quick with this next story um, in order to keep the show under an hour. There's a lot more to talk about with that first one than I thought it would. So good on us for that, right?
Right.
But the second story that we have here is from the Wall Street Journal, saying new bank regulations could favor loans to private credit. All this mumbo jumbo aside, this is basically just saying that banks are now somewhat incentivized. You know, it's less risky, that is, for them to loan money to non-bank financial institutions such as private credit and other money service businesses rather than individual businesses, individual people, what have you. And, you know, to some degree, this just makes kind of intuitive sense, right? Because, you know, these companies have less risk. So obviously, if a bank wants to be safe with their money, with their investment, right, then they're going to lend to people who pose less of a risk. On the other hand, that also means that their profit is somewhat limited because we all know, of course, that that higher risk can produce higher reward, and you know those things, risk and reward, are generally correlated, right? You know, the less risky an investment is, the less you're going to make back on it in return. Uh, but this is happening because of a regulatory issue, which makes things a little bit different, right? It's not just inherent risk of an investment, it's a government entity stepping in and creating policy that directly benefits one side while harming the other. Um, you look at this third paragraph here, it says some of the changes could also incentivize banks to lend still more money to non bank lenders. And it should challenge the idea that banks and private capital managers are playing a zero sum game with each other. Right? I mean, it that paragraph alone kind of sums up basically what we were saying there. So, what exactly are these regulations? Is something that um, doesn't necessarily need to be discussed in depth, but we still need to be familiar with them. I mean, earlier on in the article, it says one of the goals of some newly proposed U.S. capital rules is to help foster more bank lending. The thinking goes that tougher capital requirements for banks since the aftermath of the 2008 crisis have helped give rise to more non-bank lending, including the now $1 trillion plus private credit market. Within that market are the non-traded loan funds that have been receiving a lot of investor redemption requests. We've talked about private credit on this show previously and what private credit is, how it functions, how it can be beneficial, and how it can be harmful to the individual when it comes to personal finance and when it comes to investing. But the impact of something like this, where we're shifting the benefit for a lender, a bank, to lend to these private credit institutions, it is a little bit scary, right? Because we're basically saying, instead of prioritizing the members of the community that we're going to be in, which is, you know, something that is necessary under the Community Reinvestment Act, which is federal law, um, instead of prioritizing the small businesses or the local businesses, even the large local businesses, you know, for example, here in Dallas, we have plenty of very, very large businesses, some that my bank does business with and owns that relationship, plenty that we don't do business with and don't own that relationship. But all of the banks in my area have a responsibility to benefit the community of Dallas, to benefit the DFW metro area. Even for you, Matt, up in Norman, the banks in Norman and Oklahoma City have a responsibility to the community of OKC to benefit the people and the businesses and the individuals, the entities within that area, just as much as they have a responsibility to their to the shareholders. Again,
Right.
this goes back to the idea of corporate governance and business ethics, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. And I don't necessarily want to make this whole thing about the idea of business ethics, because at the end of the day, many of us don't necessarily care about that. Um, that is, our listeners don't necessarily care about that because many of us don't have businesses. And even if we do have businesses, they're generally not large enough to have to worry about this on a large scale anyway. But my point is, when if banks are going to start focusing more on lending to private credit and extremely large organizations, we're going to see less opportunity for our local leaders, less opportunity for our small businesses. We're going to see consolidation of funds and financial power in these extremely large organizations, these extremely large builders, for example, because private credit and real estate development has a very very close relationship. We're going to see less mom and pop real estate owners and landlords, and we're going to start seeing an overwhelming surge of very very large, you know, institutional real estate investors, for example, owning property. So that is my main concern with this transition to favor private credit. Is again, as consumers, now instead of saying, are we going to tolerate the actions of businesses, we're going to say, as consumers, we're being uh, directly negatively impacted by the by the decisions of not only banks but of the government, who and regulatory agencies who are in charge of those banks.
Yes, and I think that that's actually a pretty good point that I didn't think about earlier. That you're right. The Community Reinvestment Act is not only law, but in some aspects, it's a very good guiding tool for smaller banks and community banks to essentially be the George Baileys of their community. That is, of course, be stewards, drive economic growth in their own communities, so that way, a rising tide raises all ships, right? And so, and I would actually say that a lot of local banks, even the larger banks in my area and even in your area, I would argue that they already do most of their business, if not all of their business, with these smaller institutions, these small businesses. Um, and I know for a fact. I don't know, being that you may work for a larger institution than I do, but um, I know for a fact that a lot of potential clients and current clients, they are very very small mom and pop. Um, uh, you know, uh, they are uh, pillars of the community, and I do think that that's really important for the economic growth of a community. I think that's important across the nation. So I think where our frustrations really lie, right? If we were to really pinpoint this, to say, okay, well, we can say all of this, but is it really, for example, uh, in my area, is it really the medium-sized bank's fault? Is it really? It's definitely not the small bank's fault, right? Because they don't. Not only not only would they not, it's just not part of their culture, but they don't have the kind of capital to get behind these larger institutions, and these larger private credit funds. Who are we really upset about? We're really upset about the giants, right? We're at the Citibank, Bank of America, Chase, these titans that control tens of trillions of dollars, whether that's in money moved, or it's just loans or deposits or savings or what have you. These financial titans who manage tens of trillions of dollars and control the velocity of money in the United States, who really control it. That's who we're really upset about. And I think that's who hold most of these loans out. That's who give most of these loans out to these private credit funds, not only because uh, it really benefits them, but also because they're the only ones, really the only ones who have the kind of capital again to give the private credit funds. Um, and I would also say that you know going forward with this change in regulation, I'm totally with you that I like community banking, and I've actually been confused with people that I've seen in the community who have bank accounts, who and loans, and who do substantial amounts of business with, for example, Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase. And I don't know if you've ever had this kind of uh, thought process in your mind, Yankee. But for me, I'm like, well, why would you? I, you're in a community. Why would you, I mean, it's not like you're Jeff Bezos either, right? Like because for example, and what I mean by that is Apple, right? They don't exactly have a choice on who they bank with. They have to go with somebody big. Why? Because there's billions of dollars in their payroll account, and there's hundreds of millions, if not billions, in their operating account. So they need an equally large institution to hold their money. It just is what it is. But for your spec construction work builder, or your local pharmacy, why would you do so? Why would you do all of that business with somebody who's not necessarily concerned with the development of your community? Why would you do the kind of business you're doing with this bank when there are legitimate community banks who they only have a branch in your community, or they have two branches but they started in your community, and they go to your churches, they give money, they pay local taxes. You see what I'm getting at? Like, they're the ones who are not only bound by law by the CRA, but they're the ones who are directly investing in the community that you live in. So why would you go with somebody who is literally just treating you like a number? And I've had that thought several times, because I've seen a lot of people who do it, and it boggles me. And so sometimes I just try not to think about it, because I leave work absolutely flummoxed, and so and just frustrated. And so I think that's maybe why, maybe a little bit of where this frustration is coming from, because a lot of these loans ultimately, it just conceptually speaking, they have to come from the larger banks and the larger institutions, even ones like MidFirst Bank, who are not exactly as large as JP Morgan or what have you, but they still have that kind of capital. And so that's kind of what I think about it, in terms of community reinvestment and what this regulation means. I also don't like it, and I think we should actually de-incentivize. We should, what, yeah, de-incentivize people from giving loans to private credit, and instead incentivize loaning money to the community, and try to build from there.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, 100%. I mean, you said basically that, um, these, it has to be these large banks. Like you said, the J.P. Morgans, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of America, Citibank. Those are the four largest U.S. banks, right? It has to be those guys that are doing these, And to some and on a large scale, yes, you're right. Um, I don't want to necessarily call any bank out for how they operate, because we all have different styles, right? We have different cultures, we have different goals. So what they do, who they lend to is their business. How they handle their relationships is their business. But that said, there is a difference between a small bank, a mid-sized bank, and a large bank, right? At my bank, which is now significantly larger than it used to be when I first started, but at my bank, there's a reason why our commercial bankers are called relationship managers, not commercial bankers or loan officers, right? There's a reason for that, and it's because we value the relationship, right? We will bring our entire team out to visit a client in a show of force, for lack of a better term, to show that we care. We're willing to have not only the person who's directly in charge of your loan come out, but also his manager, the regional manager. We've had the CEO come out and meet clients that are large enough, right? We will bring our treasury management officer. We'll bring our SBA officer. We'll bring these people to show you that we have not only the capabilities, but the desires to meet your needs as best we can, right? The large banks don't necessarily do that. I know people that work at Chase, and while they do still have relationship managers, they are, basically called commercial bankers instead, right? They are still responsible for going out in the community and generating business, but they don't necessarily have the same follow-up that we do. They don't constantly check in. They don't take, to some degree, an advisory role like we do at my bank. And of course they do it. They do that and more even at smaller banks. I've seen and know people that work at small banks, and they quite often will bend the rules a little bit based on, for example, the fact that they know this particular business owner very well, and they know that even though his credit history may not be up to the standard that the bank looks at, they can vouch for his character and will give him the loan anyway. So there is always going to be, as you said, a need for the smaller banks, for the community banks that will do these types of things. And
Right.
and so I don't really care how much risk these these private credit institutions take away from a bank, for example. The basically the reason why they're doing this is because they say, number one, these large private credit companies know what they're doing and are willing to some degree to take on some of that risk themselves, because they are, of course, putting it or pooling their money into other investments, other projects, which fine. But if you're going to make a risk argument, you also have to understand that, again, part of the business model and how you can structure a deal. And I'm not necessarily going to go into this, but maybe this is something that we should talk about in the future, depending on how we can necessarily work this into personal finance. It's kind of like one of those, Jamie, put this on the screen type thing, right?
Right.
Is if maybe we, like I said, maybe we should talk about what it looks like to structure a deal for a bank. And
Right.
and so just kind of general overview of something that we would actually think about is these large banks are loaning to these private credit institutions, and they're saying, well, we're willing to loan X amount of money because we know that you're going to be good for this amount of money based on the return that you say that you're going to make, based on the value of the construction project or whatever it is, the value of your collateral, etc. So our risk is significantly lower because say, uh, we're putting some amount of money into this project, and the actual value of the project is so many times larger. Well, I mean, we can still do that with basically any other deal, right? We can say, I want a 50% LTV, which is a loan to value ratio. I don't have to loan you the full value of your collateral. If I'm giving you a line of credit that's secured by your accounts receivable and your inventory, and that's worth $1 million, I don't have to give you $1 million. Generally, I'm not even going to give you more than $850,000. Part of that is federal regulation. Part of it is policy, right? We won't know more than an 85% LTV, but I can go as low as I want depending on your risk. If I think you're a great creditor, I'm going to give you more leeway. If I think you're a bad creditor, I'm going to give you less leeway until I get to the point of saying I'm not going to do business with you at all. So I don't really understand what the concern about risk is when the people who are doing these loans have people like you and me. They have analysts, they have underwriters, they have loan officers, people like you and me that know how to properly collateralize these loans, how to structure these deals and make it so that our risk is within the tolerance that we set no matter what the size of the deal is. It just bothers me, but that's
Right.
like I said, that's a topic for another discussion.
A different
That
time. Exactly.
exactly. So that said, we're basically at the end of our time now, just over an hour. So uh, in conclusion, basically, we talked a lot about the possibility of dynamic or individualized pricing that Walmart could institute with these digital shelf labels. And of course, whether the prices change or not, how they change them, we can't necessarily set them, but you and I, the consumers, our listeners, we're the ones that are going to have to pay the price literally for these things. And we can only hope that Walmart remains ethical enough to keep their word and not do these blatantly discriminatory actions to make things worse. Similarly, we can only hope that banks will continue to serve the communities that they're in, either out of the kindness of their heart or out of federal obligation under the Community Reinvestment Act, to maintain relationships with the small businesses in the area, the medium businesses in the area, the large businesses in the area that are run by people who live in this area, who employ people in this area, and who care about other people in the area that they are in. So, with all of that being said, thank you all very much for watching. Uh, I'm your host, Niamki Buchanan, joined with my co-host, Matt White. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. Um, have a new episodes come out every Thursday. Have a great day.